Well, I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see.
It looks something like this.
Dear students, welcome to a corona-free classroom. How do you like it? It's kind of nice in here, isn't it? Well, anyway, in this lecture, we're going to cover chapter number 2, and it will be a part of monetary policy. So, I hope you will enjoy it. We will cover the international monetary system in chapter 2. I have added some really good websites to this slide. We have the International Monetary Fund, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, Bank of England, Bank of Japan, and so on. And these websites have a lot of good information, an amazing amount of research, and I really encourage my students to use these resources for your SWOT analysis when you write either a business plan or a marketing plan. You'll find out all kinds of good information on different regions, different sectors, and it will make your report much stronger and make you look way better. The history of money. Gold, silver, and other metals have always been used as a mean of exchange for goods and services from a historical perspective. The biblical lesson on the widow's mite or the widow's offering in the Gospels of Mark and Luke talks about a small bronze mite, also known as a lepton, meaning very small, minted by Alexander Janus, king of Judea, between 103 to 76 before Christ. And it was a coin that was minted for a long time and used well over 100 years or even more. I believe you can even go on eBay and buy widow's mites or just mites for a small penny. The good part, knowing the value of gold and silver and copper and bronze, is that everyone around the world had a value on it, and they knew how much they were willing to trade gold and silver, for example, in exchange for tea or coffee or cocoa beans or other things that they would like to travel for, buy, and ship to your home country and sell. So they knew the value of that. So we had a bimetal type standard up to 1875, where gold and silver was the predominant ways of buying and selling goods and services. The traditional gold standard between 1875 and 1914 is when gold and silver freely moved over borders in and out of countries for the purpose of export and import. And it was a time when we had a lot of international trade. The world was really beautiful in that sense. However, when World War I came around in 1914, 1915, then it ceased to be used as a coinage for international trade. Countries hoarded, more or less, gold and silver to prop up their currency, and they were really afraid of the devastating effects that the loss of gold and silver would have for a nation. So between World War I and World War II, we saw a lot of hyperinflation and depression during this period of time, and the value of money was very much up for debate. One thing that really caused all the chaos after World War I is what John Maynard Keynes will say was a result of the peace. Keynes really said that the peace was a result of the mob. You had very many people that were really, really angry in France and England especially, but even in the United States. And so the politicians of the United States, England, and France caved in to the demand of the mob and really punished Germany. Countries like Italy and Japan was pretty much neglected in the negotiations for the peace, which made them feel really bad about the situation and really took a big distance away from the United Kingdom and France, including the United States. Germany was forced to pay reparations that staggered over 11.3 billion British pounds in that time's value as a reparation to France, England, and the United States, although some other countries were totally neglected and actually got nothing. John Maynard Keynes wrote his book on the treaty that was translated to several languages. It had some issues because it was the translation was not done perfectly, and sometimes with some bias, regional bias. So it wasn't as well received as it should have been. But it pretty much outlined what the interwar period would be like when it comes to monetary system. So between 1915 and 1944, he was dead on. However, by time it was time to look at what is next after World War II, what should the world look like, Keynes was a well-known economist, and he was very influential in how to shape the post-war world. And that was done partly in Bretton Woods, and they looked at different ways of reparation and also how to rebuild a entire globe that has been devastated by war. So the idea was that the US dollars would be pegged to a ratio of, I think it was like 32 to $34 per troy ounce of gold, and then all other currencies would be pegged to the US dollars. So the United States would have lots of gold in reserve to back up the US dollar, and this is really when we got the nickname for the dollar, the King Dollar, because it was extremely strong, and it was very hard to have any type of inflation because you can't just print gold, you have to actually go out and dig it. The idea of pegging a currency to gold is very good. However, the drawback is that you can't really print money. It's pegged, so you don't have any flexibility. So as a monetary tool, it was challenging. So by time it was 1972, the world was complaining and said that we need to actually abandon the system and come up with a different idea. Now, what's interesting is that when we have a treaty on money, we typically have give it a name from the location that they had the meeting and the agreement came in place. So the Jamaica Agreement, that's really when we let go of the gold standard and it was abandoned, and the United States, United Kingdom, the countries of the European Union, it didn't exist at that time, but even Japan moved over to a total free float of their currency. Other countries have had some sort of managed float, for example, Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iraq. Other countries would have it pegged to the US dollars, and some countries don't even have a national currency, like Ecuador or Zimbabwe, Bahamas, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama, Cambodia, and so on. They might use US dollars or euros. Now, from a historical perspective, and what's happening today is that Federal Reserve banks of the world will hold gold and silver as reserves, but they will not call it money, because according to the agreement of 1972 in Jamaica, they decided it will no longer be called money. It's a commodity, but not money. Gresham's Law is fairly simple. The concept is that if you have two or several different types of metals that are being traded, you could also apply to currency, then the currency that is the least valuable will be ending up in the market and circulated. So if gold and silver is traded, then people hold on to the gold and use their silver to trade, and only exchange gold for silver when they don't have any silver. The gold and silver exchange rates can be explained with this example. where $30 would be equal to 1 ounce of gold and 6 pounds would be equal to 1 ounce of gold. So the equation would be that 30 US dollars would be equal to 6 British pounds, and simplified it would be $5 for 1 British pound. This exchange rate made it very easy for people to travel overseas and do business. And the risk of inflation was very small, given that it took very long time to actually dig for gold and silver, and it took a very long time to actually mint gold and silver or actually print paper currency. It's important to be a student of history, because what happens now will determine our future problems. So if we should understand our problems today, we actually have to go back in time and understand what happened in the past. John Maynard Keynes, who was a professor at Cambridge, wrote extensively on different types of events that were happening, and that also includes the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the post-war planning. The agreement that happened in that time in history and how it was amended going forward gave a framework within the international payments are made and how movements of capital are done, and helps understand how exchange rates should work between currencies. We'll explain the administrative code for which the IMF is working today. For the most part, most money today since 1973 is fiat money, which means that it has no intrinsic value, which means that it's not backed by gold or silver. It's just that we emotionally put a value to a dollar bill and say, this is a dollar bill because we agree upon it. It's kind of a freaky way of determining a value of a currency, but that's why Federal Reserve banks around the world will actually hold a basket of different currencies, gold, silver, and other reserve assets. Bretton Woods was named after Bretton Woods, a town in New Hampshire. That's where 44 nations from around the world met and discussed the future monetary system. The dollar-based gold exchange standard was in effect between 1945 to 1972, as earlier discussed. A very important part was that it also created the IMF and the World Bank. One purpose of the World Bank was to allow countries around the world that was in distress ask for financial help so they can rebuild their nation states. In extension, the Marshall Plan was named after a World War II general, was an initiative passed in 1948 to add foreign aid to Western Europe. It transferred over $12 billion to different programs across Europe. It not only helped rebuild factories and stuff like that over in Europe, it acted like foreign direct investment so that the Europeans could actually earn some money in the export, and as a result actually earn money to raise taxes to improve the country and the infrastructure and everything that was so devastated after the war. The Marshall Plan also kick-started the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, as a military alliance between North America and European countries, and as a result was established in 1949. The Marshall Plan helped rebuild ports, railroad, airports, roads, schools, hospitals, power plants, and much more fundamental parts of an infrastructure to make it possible to run an effective private side manufacturing. It also helped retool factories from wartime production to peacetime production. Overall, the Bretton Woods system was way more than just pegging dollars to X amount of ounces of gold as a means of exchange. Inflation and deflation is sometimes very hard to measure. A lot of financial institutions will therefore use either gold or oil and create a ratio to measure inflation or deflationary pressure. The graph illustrates the value of gold from January 2000 to July of 2010. It appears that inflation is fairly low for several years, and then as the war on terror increases and other expenses increased, and we had the financial crisis, a lot of money was printed. As an example, I used the gold price in January of 2000 at 300 with the income of $30,000 per year, and that would give you the purchasing power of 100 ounces of gold. Now in 2010, if you made $100,000 at the gold price of $1,165, then you could only buy 85 ounces of gold. So one way of comparing value is to say that the $30,000 20 years ago, given that it's 2020 this year, is that $30,000 would be equal to $116,500 in 2010 years dollars. That way it's kind of scary to say that you're better off making $30,000 in January of 2000 versus $100,000 in the year 2010. Now, the Federal Reserve, when they calculate inflation, they look at a basket of products and services and they measure inflation that way. Over time, they actually change the way they calculate inflation. Alan Greenspan was the Federal Reserve chair from 1987 to 2006. So he was the chair around until here in 2006, and Ben Bernanke took over the chair from 2006 onwards. During the financial crisis, Ben Bernanke actually changed how inflation was measured, and the way he measured inflation, or the Federal Reserve measured inflation, would say that they had very little to no inflation during that period of time. But if you look at gold value, it appears that it had a lot of inflation. So sometimes it's important to pay attention to that. There's actually firm specific inflation, or sector inflation, or industry as a whole inflation. So when you do measure the value of commodities that a business buys or sells, it's important to pay attention to that. The inflation rate from a national point of view might be totally different compared to the industry that the business is engaged in. The European Monetary Union. The idea to first attempt and create an economic and monetary union between the members of the European communities goes all the way back to 1969. The heads of state met in Hague in 1969 to draw up plans and strategies for how to create a stronger economic and monetary union by the end of the 1970s. By 1970, the European Communion had a first blueprint for an economic and monetary union, and it had 3 stages, and it's also called the Werner Plan. The collapse of Bretton Woods system, or actually just departing from it in 1972, caused a lot of inflation and oil prices to go crazy. OPEC was founded, and that also helped increase the cost of oil. Oil was priced in dollars, and other countries were deflating their currencies, making oil more expensive. They were also not able to convert US dollars into gold as initially sought in 1971. So in 72, they had to abandon that part of the plan. The debate continued, and the European Monetary Union was relaunched at the summit in Hanover in June of 1988. They had a clear, practical, and realistic step to create an economic monetary union. It all resulted in the Maastricht Treaty in 1991, and as a result, the European Union was created by 1995, and the core concept was a free flow of people, money, goods, and services, and the creation of the euro. The Maastricht Treaty and the Schengen Treaty will now be considered as a part of the constitution of the European Union. Some countries like Ireland and Denmark doesn't like the concept of having a constitution, or even calling it a constitution. They do accept the paperwork, they just don't want to have all these different treaties put together as one constitution. In 1998, the European Central Bank was created, and 11 participating nations that decided to convert to the euro was established. One core idea was to make sure that the European Union and the Euro land area would not have an inflation above 2%, which was a very large problem from the 70s throughout the 80s. When the euro was created, the nations that decided to adopt it as a currency pegged their currency into a basket, which ended up being the euro. And it started between January 1999 until January 1st, 2002, when overnight the euro was put into place. The concept of the Eurobond was really started and debated between 2009 and 2012 during the financial crisis. Until then, the European Central Bank did not have a bond program that it could use for bad times. So the European Union and the European Central Bank, they could indirectly only print money with an inflation goal of only 2%, change reserve requirements for banks, change interest rates, and try to influence by having policy plans and research made available to the public. Compared to the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, where they can also buy and sell bonds, the European Central Bank did not have that tool in its arsenal of capabilities to take action when you have a recession. So it wasn't until after 2015 that the European Central Bank was allowed to buy and sell bonds, and that's when the first case of quantitative easing actually happened, a plan that was successfully used in the United States. The European Union and the Eurozone was initially created as a trade zone where goods and services could be traded in between the different nation states. Now, a natural problem that arises is that having a country like Luxembourg, who traded with Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, France, and other countries would have to have accounting systems put in place where they needed to put a value on inventory in different currencies, and that made it very challenging and time-consuming. Having a common currency, the euro in this case, makes it much easier to do accounting. The world will always have currency crises. They happen every so often. It is typically combined with a country's financial crisis, and foreign direct investors might say, we don't want to be there anymore, we don't want to invest in your country. They sell indirectly all their securities in that nation state, go to cash, sell the local currency for example, and convert it to euros or dollars, causing a country's reserves to diminish. And one thing that typically happens is that people will then, in that country or other places, sell that currency and buy gold and silver as a hedge for inflation. One story that I heard from Russia when I was there was that the Mercedes-Benz dealer thought he was selling lots of cars when the ruble fell and making good money. But the ruble went from $6 or 6 rubles per dollar to 20 rubles per dollar, meaning that he was giving away all these cars and his sales was in money, in real money, really lousy, and he was not probably so happy after that. Here I have a couple of slides on the difference between floating currency and a pegged currency. In this example, the currency has devalued. It's gone from up here somewhere down to $1.40. And as a result, suppliers don't want to sell at that price, but the demand is very high at that price, causing a trade deficit. Since supply and demand always strive to meet each other's needs, where demand equals supply, in this case, the dollar price would increase from $1.40 to $1.60 for, in this case, British pounds. And that way it comes into perfect harmony. Compared to the previous example, where the dollar went from $1.40 to $1.60 per pound, a fixed or pegged ratio in this case would simply still remain at $1.40. However, the demand would then need to shift and decrease as a result. Thank you for watching today. Please like this channel so that you get notifications on when I upload more episodes. And chapter 3 should be up any moment. So thank you very much, and email me if you have any questions, okay? Thank you. Take care. Bye.